worldwide, more than 80% of the extreme poor live in rural areas, and many actually rely on agriculture and natural resources for their living. They are usually the hardest hit by the natural and man made disasters and often marginalized due to gender, ethnic origin, or status. It is a struggle for them to gain access to training, finance, innovation, and any new technology. We actually have less than 8 years to achieve zero hunger, and there are a number of obstacles on the way. So, today, with this discussion, we are trying to explore the roadmap for the coming years and how best researchers, academia, industry, and publishers can come together to contribute for goals of achieving zero hunger. I'm thrilled to have with us on the panel today Dr. Anne Mullen. She is Chief Editor for Nature Food. Nature Food is a nature research portfolio journal that publishes research and commentary on sustainable food systems and food security. The journal launched in January 2020 and has broad experience in human nutrition and a passion for science communication. She was director of nutrition at the Dietary Council for Great Britain, a lecturer in nutritional sciences at King's College London, and a research fellow at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and is trained as a dietitian and has obtained her PhD in molecular nutrition from Trinity College, Dublin. Welcome, Anne. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are also joined by Professor Rajeev Varshney. He's an agriculture research scientist specializing in genomics and molecular breeding with 20 plus years of service in developing countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. He has just started in this new role as Director Crop Center for Crop and Food Innovation at Murdoch University, Australia. Prior to this, Professor Varshney served at ICRISAT for about 16 years in various science leadership roles. He is highly cited in his field and has won several awards for his work around food security. A warm welcome to you, Professor Varshney. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
We're
Aakanksha.
also excited. Thank you, Professor Varshney. We're excited to have with us Dr. Madhulika Singh. She is an agriculture professional. She has been working with CIMMYT for last 9 years, and her experience as a research fellow has been with the Indian Institute of Maize Research at New Delhi. She specializes in maize physiology, and her focus has been around research extension activities related to balancing gender. And this involves a lot of interaction with female and male farmers, understanding their requirements, and provide technical inputs around those. She works in the field of sustainable agriculture, resource conservation, food security, farmers, and extension workers who require training. Thank you so much, Dr. Madhulika, for joining us. So we are at the fag end of 2020, and we have less than a decade actually to win the race against zero hunger. So I would like to start with Rajeev, with you, and I would like to know that as an agriculture researcher who's been on the field for many years and has worked in various parts of the world, do you think with the limited time in hands, we will be able to achieve the zero hunger goal, and what are the key challenges in achieving this by 2030? Also, if you could throw some light on the approach that we need. Do you think the whole world can together in a unified approach resolve these matters, or different regions and different parts of the world need to adopt a different strategy to resolve the concerns?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aakanksha, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I'm really very excited to be on this panel together with Anne and Madhulika. And at this stage, let me thank you, Aakanksha and Springer Nature, for organizing this important session on the eve of the World Food Day. And as we know that 1 in 10 people right now worldwide is suffering from hunger, and nearly 1 in 3 people lack regular access to adequate food. Unfortunately, soaring food prices at present has affected more than 47% of the countries around the world. And we all are aware that Ukraine crisis have triggered food shortage for the world's poorest people. Though, as you mentioned, Aakanksha, that the world has made significant progress during last several decades. However, In recent time, the world also started to witness a reversal of progress in the fight against hunger. I should also cite a report from the December 2021, where a group of about 120 NGOs from around the world expressed deep concerns over the 370% rise in people experiencing catastrophic level of hunger since April 2021, and the staggering 45 million people who are at on the brink of famine. Current approaches, which we are talking that now we've just left with the 8 years to achieve that SDG zero hunger by 2030, it seems that current approaches to hunger prevention and relief need to be dramatically expanded, especially in the light of three C's. One C is the COVID, second C is climate change, third C is about conflict, growing level of the conflicts around the world. And I should also mention that a report in this 2022 from the DEVEX and Action Against Hunger indicated that nearly 90% of the international food security and nutrition experts surveyed predicted that without innovation and bold action, global hunger will continue to rise over the next decade. However, at the same time, the positive note is that two-thirds of those people, they believe that achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals of zero hunger by 2030 is still possible if current approaches change. And they also say that it is possible to end hunger if the United Nations 2030 deadline is extended. Anyway, now coming to the main question about the challenges. Yes, I have been working in Sub-Saharan Africa and Asia for last 20 years or so. And I believe that there are many other challenges, but I would like to mention three key challenges which are hampering to achieve zero hunger. And as I said earlier also, but again, conflicting political priorities in the different countries. Another one is very important, a disconnect between the policies and implementation. Each country is having the policies to achieve that, but now when we talk about that implementation, then we find a big disconnect. Also, I should mention that, which is not very good, but in many countries, in developing countries, I think many national governments need to have a strong political will. And this can be achieved that when they're ready to have the higher investment and also ready to embrace the innovations in technology. What are the solution? Yes, you are right. We need to have the unified approach. And I will talk about it later, but I would like to mention at least three important approaches. One is that when we talk about achieving this SDG zero hunger, achieving zero hunger at the global level, but I think it's really important that we need to take a localized approach. Current approaches to eradicate hunger could be more effective if they are driven by the local or community level stakeholders. Second, each of us are trying to do something, but I think it's the time now that we need to have the focus on high impact initiative. So basically, there is a need to expand evidence-based poverty alleviation program, such as vocational training for the rural youth. So we need to touch the roots of the main problem. And third, I will say that we need to be ready, embracing innovations. There are opportunities for progress, including embracing innovations to produce more food, reduce the food wastage, strengthening the value chains. And for this purpose, again, I would suggest or I would propose that national governments around the world should be ready to expand research and development. So I would like to leave this question or at this point, Akansha. We'll come back to you when you have time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rajeev. You very correctly pointed out about the disconnect in policy, which actually goes a long way in achieving the goals globally as one family together. And at this point, I would like to ask Anne that as Dr. Rajeev also pointed out, that there is a lot of advancement and progression that is already being made in the agricultural research, which is supporting the cause of SDG 2. But at the same time, we see that there is a disconnect between uh, the work that is happening in the labs and the science at the science policy level. We are sort of lagging behind there. So do you feel that all of these research advancements is actually able to make a dent into the policy shaping sphere of how the policies are developed. And in this context, if you can share some of the pathways which can help in bridging the gap between science and policy implications.
Um, that is a very good question. It's very, I think that Professor Varshney and yourself, Aakanksha, have just really hit the nail on the head. There is a disconnect between science and policy. And I think publishers have a key role to play in bridging that disconnect. But also a very key point that Professor Varshney made was about political will and the willingness to act on information and scientific information for that, for the purposes of what I'm about to discuss, which is the role of publishers in bridging science and policy. So the pathways that I'd like to just address very quickly is publishers have a responsibility. First of all, we curate the science. So our responsibility first is to make sure that the scientific information that's being published through our journals, for example, and our books is the best. And many of the nature portfolio journals, for example, are highly selective. We try to publish what we see as the very best of science, and peer review comes into that. Peer review is our traditional way of assessing the quality of science. And I think that our responsibility is to maintain standards in that. Within that, we look for quality, scientific quality, but of course, reproducibility, transparency, and we innovate all the time, or publishers should innovate all the time in how they bring the best science in front of policymakers and the scientific community, of course. So that's the first thing, is to uphold the principles and the outcomes of the peer review process and scientific publishing process. The second responsibility we have as publishers is actually to think thematically and to think about, as you mentioned earlier, the societal challenges, and to focus what we publish on societal challenges. And more we see scientific journals taking the thematic approach, linked in with the SDGs, of course, but also grand societal challenges. So journals that will focus on food, for example, journals that will focus on the challenges of water, the challenges of energy, climate change, so that the remit of the journal is very, very clear. It's to solve or address a societal challenge. And that's our responsibility, to ensure that what we do is thematic. We then need to think about our audiences. I mentioned earlier that we have to communicate to policymakers, but of course our primary audience is the scientific community. We publish for our community to advance what we know. But more and more, I think publishers have a responsibility to broaden their audiences and ensure that what is published is understandable to not only the public, but also to policymakers. And it's our responsibility to innovate again in publishing, to make sure that those bridges are crossed through, for example, policy briefs, through events like this event, but other events as well that we work with, and that we're engaged with policymakers. So increasingly, we've got some great examples. Nature and Nature Food, for example, linked in with the UN for the UN Food System Summit, their science days. And that was great to be in the room where science and policy come together and to try and bridge those gaps. And another example is the Eat Lancet report for the Eat Lancet report on human and planetary health. I mean, that was a great example of where scientists, civil society, policymakers, and broad stakeholders in food got together. And I think some magic happened with Eat Lancet, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, that's, I think, for bridging, the publisher's role is to make sure the science is the best, that we focus in on societal challenges that are meaningful for the scientific community, but also the policy community, and that we broaden our ways of communicating, our platforms, to ensure that we reach both and we try and facilitate the needs of both.
Right. Thank you so much, Anne. Actually, communication is the key, and we need to find innovative methods to communicate and ensure that the information which researchers are developing is reaching to the policymakers and then to the common people on ground. But we have also seen that in last few years were exceptionally difficult, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, and there were many other complex food security challenges that the world has faced, with slowdowns on many fronts and turndowns because of conflicts and climate change and war-like situations across the globe. I would like to ask Dr. Rajeev that we can, as agriculture researchers, try to grow better varieties and food which is highly nutritious. But other than growing the surplus of crops, do you think that there are other bottlenecks that actually derails our journey from achieving SDG 2?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Akansha. So you are right. And I think that we had a lot of focus on enhancing the food production. But in my opinion, eradicating hunger is not just about increasing the food production or access to the nutritional food. It is also about ensuring that production of food is sustainable, both in relation to food supply and for the conservation of the natural environment. We need to consider sustainability as well as conserving biodiversity. And I think, as Anne was mentioning, that now this nature food is one of those key journal that in which scientists they can put the best approaches throughout the whole value chain, starting from the food production, reducing the food wastage, etc. Now, let me also share that by 2050, there will be an estimated additional 2 billion people to feed. Unfortunately, the modern food production often erodes and degrades soils and freshwater and ocean environments. This is resulting in increased pollution from waste and sadly the death and destruction of our biodiversity. The world's expanding population is putting a lot of pressure on our natural resources. This means that the way food is produced and consumed today needs to move towards more sustainable practices. I should also mention that this is good that we are talking about enhancing the food production, and we have done a great by using technologies and policy interventions. For instance, even if you talk about India before the Green Revolution used to produce about 11 to 12 million metric tons wheat, but now this produces more than 110 million tons and has become a net exporter. Same thing, India is producing about 27 million ton pulses, and until 10 years back they were producing just 12 to 14 million tons. So we need to think many other areas, for example, how good we are in controlling food wastages. And in many developing countries, I can tell that food wastages happens at the level of the post-harvest loss. And in the developed countries, this happens mainly at the time of the after the food is processed. So either this is from the supermarket level or the restaurant level. And as per some estimate, about 30% of the food is lost or wasted each year. And this is the range of 2.5 billion ton worth 230 billion US dollar is wasted. This affects the economy, the environment, and society, both globally and in each of our country. So what I'm trying to say, so we should not just think about the food production, but we need to see all other areas across the value chain. And I think the protecting food sources from the damage caused by the natural disaster. And I think we know that in many countries we are having those issues. We are having the floods, bushfire, etc. So this is also very imperative. So I think that's what I would like to say. So we need to think many other areas so that we can contribute towards food, uh, food security, nutrition security across the different countries. And I should also mention that these issues, these are not just remain to the scientists, but also should be reaching to the policy makers. And for that, Springer is the perfect platform for putting those kind of research. And I know that Aakanksha, you and we are also working on a book series in this area. So I think these kind of book series, this kind of a special issue of the journal, they become an important document. And as a scientist, this is our responsibility to share with that funders, with the policymakers, with the politicians, etc. So they should appreciate the value of these different approaches. So that's what my view is on this topic, Aakanksha. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Rajeev. Absolutely, you've actually involved a very important part of this whole food supply chain, which are people. Because if we are not, involving the right people at the right stage, then the whole process is not complete, and we're not able to achieve the goals. As researcher, a lot of work is already happening. Then we as publishers are contributing our bit, but as Dr. Rajiv also pointed out, that there are so many people like indigenous people who are actually the guardians of the world's terrestrial biodiversity, which is essentially the source of all the food that we receive. They're suffering a very, very high rate of poverty and malnutrition. And in this whole supply chain, it's not just the farmers or the food producing industry, but also these indigenous people who are very, very important. They play a very key role. And in the developing countries, we see only 10 to 20% of the landlords are women. So talking about sustainability, I think sustainability starts with equal opportunity. So unless there is an equal opportunity and there is a fair share of land ownership between all genders, I think we'll still be lagging behind somewhere. So at this point, I would like to bring in full Dr. Madhulika, and I would like to ask you that with your experience working on field with women farmers especially, what are the different kind of barriers do you think women face in agriculture, and both as a researcher also in the field of food science and agriculture research?
Thank you, Aakanksha. The topic that you have, raised is really very close to my heart, gender and agriculture. Initially, when I had joined CIMIT in 2013, we had, planned a training for women farmers on weed management. This is just an experience that I would like to share in order to understand exactly what happens at the ground level. So, we took all the package and practices that we used to take to the male farmers, like, the pamphlets and stuff like that. But when we were giving the training, we got to know that, the things that they want exactly is a bit different from the male farmers, right? The constraint, as I can understand, or most of us understand, can be, education, a little bit less of understanding when we, give pamphlets. Instead, if we would have used, visual depictions, or say, video of that sort, which could be like, more understandable by them. So it happened like we realized that, the way we wanted to train them was not exactly the right process that we should be going to the female farmers. So the requirement is that we need to do need assessment before, reaching to the female farmers.
So yeah, I will come back to you, Dr. Madhulika, but thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And it actually shows at how interconnected we all are with each other, and how our economies and lives are so linked with each other that if one community or one gender is left behind, it just has... Yes, we can take you back. All right. Okay. There is some technical difficulty there. So meanwhile, and I would like to ask you that as we just heard that there's so much interconnectivity between the different segments, whether it's the gender, whether it's different indigenous groups, and in the whole supply chain, researchers and industry, all of these things are so interconnected. So with your experience of curating a lot of work around food sciences, if you can share some of the success stories where all of these new innovations and the work that is happening on the social side, on the sciences side, how some of these success stories that you have seen lately, if you can share those with us, and how can those be linked with accelerating our journey to zero hunger?
Thank you very much. So I guess one thing that really struck me from both the other speakers is this idea about localized, what works at a local level. And one thing that I regret to a large extent is that we haven't published enough case studies. And I think that these are really important. I think probably in books, Aakanksha, you can answer this probably to a greater extent than I can. But case studies are not published as much as they should be in the research, in the journal literature, the research journals. And that's one thing that I would really like to see develop more, to see what works at a local level. We publish a lot on technological innovations, and they're all very exciting. There've been some wonderful technological innovations that I'd like to mention just very, very briefly, some things that really excite me. There have been great advances in data networks, or data science and data network science. For example, and I'm a nutritionist, so this is not at all my area, but I'm constantly blown away by what we can do with data and what is being done now with data. How decentralized it is, and how it can inform such great decision making. Modeling scenarios, not just of, for example, nutrient flows. I'm a nutritionist, so I'm very interested in big data and its utilization in looking at nutrient flows across the world. You can combine trade data with nutritional data, and you can come up with some really, really cool stuff. We've just published a really nice paper on nutrient flows using the FAO food balance sheet data, which is traditionally, I think, concerned with calorie production. But now we can refine that down to nutrients, and I find that very interesting. We also obviously have great advances in how we understand, model the impacts, environmental impacts of our food systems, and the impacts that the environment has, or climate change has, and elements of climate change and environmental change, what that has on our food production. I think data allows us to really well integrate climate change with biodiversity, land use, food systems, not just food supply chain, but food systems. And it's really cool how we can model from data proposals and scenarios for change. So there's so much that can be done from the data point of view. There's also technological innovation, obviously, with food production, things like novel food production. We're about to publish a focus on cellular agriculture. That I find that all very interesting. But I think one thing, and just to link it back to the local issue really, is we have a saying in Nature Food. We published an editorial that we need more than a technological fix. And this is where, a lot of what we publish is at the global level. And I think that to bring it back to local conditions, local scenarios, is really important. We need to move beyond technological fixes, and we need to start to understand that technology and innovation there requires social and political innovation to ensure that at the local level, social and political structures are in place and innovate to adopt the right technologies, and that we can rationalize the technological advances that we have at our disposal, and we can rationalize them and ensure that there is equity in how they're governed, that how they're deployed is equitable, that it's supported by society and supported by politics, and not just supported by industrial interests, for example. So that's just a cautionary note. I think that we can invest a lot in technological innovation, but investing in social and political institutions that make those innovations work and can rationalize what will work at the local level is really important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I would like to come back to Dr. Madhulika once again. You were sharing with us about the barriers that women face as a farmer and as an agriculture researcher.
Yeah. I was sharing my experience in CIMIT. From that time till now, we have, reached almost to 0.2 million farmers, female farmers. And the thing is that what helped us is like that, I think the training, etc., that we started giving, we realized our mistakes. So I would like to emphasize one thing: when we are working with any farmer, be it male, be it female, we as a researcher should not be forcing, things on them. We should understand their concerns, their requirements, and then take things to the field. This is one thing that is like, which should be like, the most important things that we, actually, I'm working at a very ground level, Aakanksha, I'm based in Bihar. I'm working with farmers in Bihar and Eastern UP. And the thing is that at some point of time, we as researchers take things to them, and we don't realize that whether these things will work in their ecologies or topologies or not. We put those things in front of them, and then we think that they will be accepting whatever we are giving to them. So I feel as researchers, we should be united in our thoughts, be it IRI, be it CIMMIT, be it ICRISAT. Whenever a technology is working, I think that that particular technology will be working for the farmers who are working with CIMMIT, who are like the CIMMIT farmers or the ICRISAT farmers or the IRI farmers. It cannot be like, different for people others. So it's like, when we are taking any technologies to them, I feel that, that is the most important key for all researchers, not to have conflicts among each other while taking the technologies to the farmers, right? So if they accept it, they will. And farmers are the most intelligent people, I would say. They are like, the basic, the ground level scientists who are working in the field. So with the female farmers, constraint remained, knowledge, and they are not able to, speak when they are individually. So we learned from our experience that, whenever they are in a self-help group sort of, thing, that works more with them, because of that apprehension of talking in the public. When men are there, not sitting, they will, most of the time, they will keep standing, or they will be segregated in a different group. So this is what the constraint was. These are the constraints. But then we also found out that when the production comes into picture, the female farmers feel are equally productive than in comparison to the male farmers whenever a technology is implemented. So the thing is that it is just, I would like to underline the understanding of the researcher or the extension people that we are taking things to the male or the female farmers. We cannot segregate on the basis of gender. That if they are not understanding any particular thing, that doesn't mean that, they cannot take the technology. It's the way we need to mend that particular, the way we take the technology to them needs to be, different. With respect to the male farmers, this is one thing, this is the basic constraint. It's like we'll feel that no, they are not able to understand, so leave them. We have to make numbers because the funders and donors are wanting, we have to reach a particular numbers, and so such things are the basic constraints with respect to female farmers. And then one more thing is that the land holdings and decision making sits it's basically not with them, right? So at some point of time, that is also one more constraint that is, we visualize with them. So this is also one thing. But then when we come to the work that is being done by them, almost 50 to 60% of work, be it at the seeding time, at the time of transplanting, at the time of weeding, at time of threshing, at the time of cleaning, everything, most of it is performed by females. But still, when we have to come up with who is a farmer, it is mostly it is the male who comes into picture. This is our realization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Madhulika. So candidly, you have explained the whole landscape of how the gender roles actually affects the system, especially in the agricultural field and in the whole life cycle of how the food is made. And you've actually made us realize that it's not just inclusivity, but also being able to empathize with the farmers and how their indigenous ways are. We need to be patient and empathizing with them. I would like to ask one more thing with you, that if it's an ideal world and if we are able to bring more gender equity and inclusivity into the system, do you think that will fast forward our journey to zero hunger?
Definitely, yes, I would say, because, whenever females come into picture, they are the most managed people, with little of things, they manage most of the household, right? So whenever, if I feel that if it is a farmer, if she is a farmer, and if she's producing equally in comparison to the male farmers also, their focus is more towards their children or their family members achieving more nutritious food, who is getting what, they are the deciding factors and stuff. So I feel whenever they are produce whatever amount they produce, I think they will be the best person to ensure more of nutrition and stuff. And the thing is that when we are moving towards attaining zero hunger, we also look forward towards, multiplying their yield and stuff. So I feel if it is implemented with the male, female, both here, I would say both the genders, perform equally in the field. So I think those technologies, etc., will, as Dr. Varshney said, that it works at the field level. If there is more yield, then definitely sustainability is also one key factor, which Dr. Varshney has discussed, that it's not only the yield that we are focusing, it's sustainable yield. It's the, changing climate and things like that should be kept in mind whenever we are ensuring the right amount of production, etc.
Thank you so much, Dr. Madhulika. That brings me back to Dr. Rajeev once again. And this time I would like to ask you, Rajeev, that if if you are if you have the magic wand and if you can just do three things that will make change to ensure that no one in this world is left behind hungry, what would be those three things that you would like to do?
Thank you, Aakanksha. And I think we had really good inputs from Anne and also from Madhulika. And I think we were talking about the sustainability. This is very important, and sustainability comes in the different flavors. And I think inclusiveness is very important. And when we talk about agriculture, and especially in the developing countries, then this is very key, as Madhulika highlighted about inclusion of the women farmers, because they are the important component of the agriculture. Anyway, I don't have the magic wand, but I can certainly mention those three things that what we need to do. And I will say more from the research community or from the policymaker side based on that my experience. So I think, and you also asked when you were asking the first question about the unified approach. And I think this is very, very important now for all of us to realize when we are talking about achieving this SDG 2, zero hunger, collaboration. Collaboration is key. And why we need to have the collaboration? Because a lack of clear, unified policies around hunger from the national governments, donors, and other actors, they are creating this delay in achieving this SDG 2. So what we need to do, we need to have clear-cut collaboration and across all the different actors in the value chain. Farmers also play a very important role. We need to think that demand-driven innovation so that farmers can embrace. So again, what I would like to say, collaboration is key. So we need to talk about that. Second, as a scientist, we do any kind of research, etc. But if we don't have the enabling government policies, I think those innovations, those technology will not be reaching to the farmers. So I think this is a need. There is a need to overcome challenges affecting human hunger-related government programs, and there is a need for having a strong will of the various governments around the world. We have already seen during last 30, 40 years, some countries like India, China, Singapore, South Korea, they have made tremendous progress because in these countries, they had the strong government will, they had that enabling policies, so they have been moving further. And now I know that several countries in Africa are also moving in this direction. So I think that we need to work in this direction. So enabling government policies is very important. This is not in the hand of the scientists, but in the hand of the policymakers. But if we would like to talk about the achieving SDG 2, then this is very important. Third is embracing innovations. I think if we need to achieve this particular SDG, we need to make farmers beneficiary, then different countries' government, they need to be well prepared and ready for using innovation, for accepting those innovations across the entire value chain, starting from the crop breeding technology for enhancing crop production. We are all aware that how several countries were not able to harness the full potential of genetic engineering, GM, etc. So I think this is not a good thing. Now we have the gene editing as emerging technology. And I know that several countries, they're already moving in this direction. They appreciate the value. So I think that we, as a scientist, this is our job also to influence that policymakers. And I think in India, I know that my colleagues, my collaborators, many people that from the Indian National Science Academy, National Academy of Agriculture Sciences, many of them, they worked with the Department of Biotechnology. And just 2 weeks back, we came out, the government Department of Biotechnology came out with the standard of operating procedures for the gene editing. They already made sure that SDN1, SDN2, they are not considered as the GM technology. So I think these are the ways that we need to come up with these, from the different governments, that they need to be pro policies if they are helping farmers, if they are helping their society, if they are helping the environmental sustainability, and we always need to consider about the biodiversity. So I think these are very important things. So I would like to say that governments should be ready not to, so basically to accept the technology, not to just enhance the food production, but also reduction the food waste, strengthening the value chains. And for all these things, we need to expand the investment in research and development. Different national government need to see that what kind of research investment they are putting in agriculture. So I think, in my opinion, as 3 point, but I will suggest again, policies and embracing the innovation. So I think these are the three key things I would like to highlight at this stage. Back to you, Aakanksha.
Thank you, Dr. Rajeev. I would like to ask the same question to other panelists also. So, Madhulika, maybe 3 points from you that can solve the global problem of food security and zero hunger.
I feel in order to increase, earlier also I said in order to increase the yield and all, we should focus on both the male and female farmers' education and awareness programs to make it make the agriculture more sustainable and profitable for the farmers, and then attaining more yield in order to cater the ongoing population. Secondly, I feel that we should stop the food supply hoarding, which leads to price hikes basically, and also stop food wastage. And definitely this we cannot do, but still I would say that reducing the economical difference between individuals can also serve the purpose.
Right. Thank you, Madhulika. And your views on how the problem of zero hunger can be solved. 3 quick methods.
Yeah, sure. So from a publisher's point of view, I think it would be important here. The first thing is as I mentioned earlier, I think publishers need to increasingly think local rather than think global in what we publish. And I think that's, I mentioned case studies, but I think, testing innovations at a local level and a diversity of local levels is really, really important, because what works in one region will not work in another region. And that's, again, rationalizing technologies and where they fit best. So I think publishers have an obligation to think local. And I've been very inspired by the 2 speakers here today and what they've spoken about. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think publishers really need to embrace their role in enhancing the science policy interface. And that goes back again to what I mentioned earlier, our role in communication, how we can deliver what scientists say, champion science, the best of science, so that it's communicated correctly or well communicated to policymakers, and equally taking the needs of policymakers and communicating that back by commissioning in our scientific endeavours. So we have a great role to play in the science policy interface, and I think we need to identify it and embrace it. The third thing is really, I think, a greater acknowledgement of food systems. As opposed to, elements of the food supply chain. I think it's not just important that we embrace it in what we do publishing-wise, so that we understand the impacts of food supply chain on climate change and the impact of climate change on the supply chain, biodiversity, that we think in this integrated food systems way, but we put it to policymakers, think in a food systems way as well, so that we kind of act somehow to remove those silos where agriculture, economics, health are all treated as separate entities. I think we really need to push policymakers towards the systems way of viewing these, and to realise that they're all integrated, that health, climate change, planetary health, human development, all integrated, and the policies that are made in one ministry impact the outcomes of others. So they're the 3 things.
Right. Thank you so much, Anne. We also have some questions from the audiences, and I heard that there was a lot of mention about local markets and taking care of the people who are left behind. And as the theme is to try and make efforts to not leave anyone behind, this question is about low-income countries, and in some of the middle-income countries also, where agriculture is the key for livelihoods, what are the provisions that government can prioritize about making sure the affordability of the healthy diets is there, and also some thoughts around the redistribution and distributive justice support with respect to supporting the local markets. If Dr. Rajeev is there, or Madhulika, if any one of you would like to take this up.
Can start. So I think this is really very good question. And when we are talking about the food security, and as I also mentioned, that I think we need to think from the local perspective, the local crops also, because in some countries, some crops are important. Like for instance, you see around the world, in United States or so, they are growing corn, they are growing the wheat, etc. But if you talk in some African countries, like in Western Central Africa and Ethiopia, they are talking about teff. In Western Central Africa, they are talking about, for instance, cassava. So in those countries, it's really important that we need to enhance the crop productivity there. We need to think from that perspective. Second is that we are talking about the crop diversification. This is also important. Third is that when we are talking about the smallholder farmers, even through the research, through the government support program, we can enhance the production. But this is the key, that how farmers can be connected to the market so that they can also access, they can also have more revenues, they can have more resources, and so that they can send their children to the school, etc. So I think that these are all the key things that we need to see from the local perspective. And when we can think about the improving agriculture at the local level, we can think about enhancing the livelihood at the local level, then we should be able to address this particular point, that how we can contribute to the SDG too. So that will be my suggestion at this stage.
Thank you, Rajiv. Madhulika, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, Dr. Rajiv has, already made, most of the points clear. I would say, market linkage is one of the important factors that we need to deal whenever we are placing any crop at the field level. Because the thing is that if we are in remote and we suggest a farmer to grow baby corn, or which is like maybe capsicum, which is not useful, where the local market is like very far off. And another thing that basically, because we don't have, much of the post-harvest losses that we were talking earlier in the, that is also one concern that we need to deal with, because there are no storage facilities, not much storage facilities that is in the developing nation is also one concern, which is like the farmers are bound to sell off their produce from the field itself, which makes it like, selling them at a lower rates generally. So basically, these are the basic concerns that, and inclusion of all is one thing that you were discussing. That was also part of the question. I feel that whenever we are talking about smallholder farmers, it's not only the farmers who are having their own, plots or farm fields. We also talk about sharing shared croppers or leased farmers. So it can be like in that way also, if we see that it can be like a forum for inclusion of most of the farmers to produce more.
Right, absolutely.
Because many a times, the big farmers are generally not very much keen in doing farming now these days. They are interested in other business or stuff like that. So it gives a platform to the, small the shared croppers and leased farmers to come into picture. I think Dr. Varshney may add on to these points.
Thank you, Madhulika. So I think it's the local and the seasonal is the key words which are emerging, that we have to be inclusive. We need to go more local and be just operate as much as in tandem with the ecosystems, so that we are sustainable and we are ensuring that everyone is included in our journey to achieve zero hunger. And I have another question, which is for the publisher. It can be a little tricky one, but this person actually wants to know that there is a lot of research that happens at the early stage, junior researchers, which is relevant and can also bring in solutions to the global problems, bringing in a bit of a local flavor there as well, because they're working in the region, wherever they're doing their PhDs or wherever they're based. So, how as a publisher, and especially coming from a very prestigious brand like Nature, do we have a provision of giving some space to researchers who are very early in their career?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. The fundamental answer is yes, of course, of course. I think I think there are, from the editorial point of view anyway, I think there are perceptions of barriers among early career researchers to publishing in, journals that have a high impact reputation. I think we really do welcome early career researchers to submit their work. And very often, I can only speak for my journal, we're all full-time employed editors, so we do take the time with every single paper to read every single paper and engage with it. I know that other journals don't have full-time paid employees working as editors. So my team and I, we sit down, we read every pre-submission inquiry, every email, every paper, and we consider it in a group. So we are looking for those papers because they're what's new, what's fresh, and what's inclusive and diverse and interesting. So I can only encourage early career researchers to give it a chance, give it a go. Don't feel those barriers. For my journal and the other research journals in the Nature family, we welcome emails, pre-submission inquiries, short or long, but short, I'm thinking about this, what do you think about that? And we actually do, we're all scientists in my team, so we engage quite a lot and we do give feedback. And very often the peer review process, whether your paper is successfully published or not, the peer review process teaches people so much, and you will learn from the feedback of peers. I mean, what better opportunity is there to get feedback from eminent scientists in a particular field on your paper than the peer review process? So I think there are a lot of perceptions about barriers, but I would just encourage, I'm a researcher, my team are all researchers, and I can safely say that I felt barriers to submitting my work to Nature when I was a researcher, but now I regret that. I really think that, it's a thing, give it a go and send an email if you don't want to submit the whole paper, just test the water. I hope that answers your question, but I do feel that these barriers need to really be brushed aside. And really, to be honest, it's our responsibility as senior researchers to encourage our PhD students and research fellows submit, go ahead, try it.
Thank you, and these were some wonderful suggestions and tips for the young researchers. Dr. Madhulika, last few points from your end.
I would like to share my experience with Springer Nature because I have just 9 years of experience. That doesn't make, when I started my I have signed one book with Springer, an edited book. It is Unheard Being Heard. And I would like to say that when I started this book, I never thought that, the proposal will be accepted from my side, because that apprehension was there. But then the ideas and the things that we wanted to place in was really accepted by the publishers. I would say that I think they are very they accept innovative and new ideas also. And being young researcher should not demoralize you or should make you think that you cannot place the plate in front of them. So at least you should give a try. If things are genuine and if things are of that level, they do accept the proposal and stuff. Now, this is just my own experience, so I wanted to share this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Madhulika. So I'm really happy and excited that we had such a wonderful discussion, and Dr. Rajeev also wants to add something.
Yes, thank you. So I think not to this topic, but I would like to mention that this session is really very productive session where we also heard from that publisher perspective, and Anne has provided really good ideas, good suggestions that how these kind of discussion sessions can be communicated in the form of the research paper, journals, book, etc. And I think Springer is already playing a key role in that. So we would like to congratulate Springer. Second is Aakanksha, and as I said earlier, and I think who are listening this or participating in this session, because many of them, they also organize or keep on organizing these sessions, panel sessions, workshops. I think your session is also an example for them when we are talking about inclusiveness. And as I told earlier, I have been on many panels, and I always encourage even the organizers that they should be bringing the women researcher, policymaker, etc. Hardly you will find 10%, 20% women here. I'm feeling in minority because I'm having this 30% or 25% of those people as men. But this is good. I think this is an example that other panel session organizers, workshops should be taking this thing. We need to think from the inclusiveness from all perspective. So anyway, thank you very much, Aakanksha. Congratulations to you for organizing this wonderful session. Madhulika, always you are bringing this gender perspective in agriculture. Highly appreciated. Thank you very much to all of you. And thanks to all the participants as well.
Thank you, Dr. Rajeev. And we all together as researchers and extension workers, publishers, we all are trying to overcome this big challenge looming large on the whole world about food security in the different ways, in numerous ways that we can, because every one of our actions matter and they all are interconnected. So on this World Food Day, I think we should all together pledge for collective action and global solidarity to transform the food systems so that we can foster inclusive economic growth, address inequalities, increase the resilience, and achieve sustainable development, thereby leaving no one behind and doing it all together. So thank you to all the panelists for taking out time and sharing your views. This was a very wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, all of you.